Hey, it's Mike with Aegis Defense again. So this is going to be a continuation of what we were talking about in the last video, and just a brief synopsis of what we went over. We discussed what were three big primary concerns with radiation were we to be in a radiological accident, attack involving a radiological dispersal device, such as a dirty bomb, or an actual nuclear attack. And in any of those scenarios, we kind of focused on three things with alpha, beta, and gamma radiation, and there were different kinds of radiation, but that wasn't really the focus of that video. Really, we were looking at just kind of a survival, keep your family safe situation on how you can create a buffer between you and that radiological event that keeps you safe. And we went over things like time, distance, and shielding. And we went over some items that you could use to protect yourself involving radiological sources of iodine, radioactive iodine. And I mentioned briefly something called hotlines. And that's what we're going to go over today. This is the just kind of a brief overview of what a hotline is. Now, in military terms or hazmat terms, a hotline is just a flow of travel and stations set up in order to decontaminate yourself and your gear to go from a dirty area into a clean area, to an area that's contaminated with nuclear materials to one that is now clean where we can be safe. And then it also has a reverse flow of leaving that clean area and going and suiting back up and going back into a contaminated area. Right now, we're just going to focus on decontamination briefly, and we're going to look at, as we go through the whiteboard real quick, what that hotline could look like. Okay. Now, this is not set in stone. There are several other ways to do this. Find out, if this is something you want to pursue. Find out what works best for you. To encourage you, definitely do your own research and your own digging as well. I'm certainly not the only source on this. Now, having dealt with it in my background and training with chemical and nuclear environments, a hotline is set up pretty simple. Now, we looked at the first video and we looked at what an initial exclusion zone would look like in our downwind or evacuation area. And in those scenarios, we always wanted to find ourselves upwind from the source. So wind is blowing decontamination away from us. Now, how a hotline is going to work is that no matter where we're located, as long as we're not downwind of that, that's bad. But where the hotline is located, the flow is going to change. So with that, for the sake of argument, like we did last time, we're going to have a wind proceeding from west to east. Okay, so here's our fancy little arrow down here. Okay, here's our wind direction. And how a hotline is going to work is that the hotline will proceed in the opposite direction instead with that wind. And why that's like that is because the wind will actually help blow any particulates like the alpha radiation we mentioned away from us. We don't want that in our clean zone. So as we're proceeding through our hot zone, okay, wind is blowing contaminants and aiding us in decontamination, okay? Now, the first station that you're going to have in a hot zone is essentially going to be your equipment drop. This is where you're going to start taking gear off that needs to be decontaminated, okay? So we're going to have our equipment drop off. And we may have buckets for things such as gas masks or clothing, and these are things that are going to have to get decontaminated and cleaned up for any future use. Now, after that, we're going to have something called a shuffle pit. And again, we're going to proceed in this direction. And what a shuffle pit is something like a Teflon jug or plastic jug or Tupperware container, or large enough for a fully grown person to stand in. And it will also and it could be something like a kiddie pool too. And what we're going to put in it is something called a solution of water and super tropical bleach, STB. Now, and I'll put a link in the description below on ways you can procure super tropical bleach if you wanted to make like just a decontamination kit for your house. Something you might not ever need, but you got that there just in case. Okay, and what we're gonna do is literally gonna shuffle our feet through that pit. Why? Because as we walk through, we don't want our shoes and clothing to go into that clean zone and spread more contamination. Okay, so we're gonna go through that shuffle pit. Okay. And then our next station after that is where we're going to start taking off and removing more of that outer wear that we have. So we dropped our equipment, maybe masks and the like. We've proceeded into the shuffle pit. We've shuffled our feet off. Well, now we got to do something with those boots or shoes or whatever our footwear is, okay? And we're going to drop those into bins and everything too. Now, this is the point where we call the hotline. And our hotline is that everything on On this side, this is our dirty side. This is where contamination is. That's where the wind's blowing it, and we're going to treat this as our dirty zone. Okay. As we proceed into the hot zone, this is going to be our initial exclusion area where we're going to proceed with decontamination. So we've now removed our footwear. So this is where footwear would be. And any other clothing that we have. And yes, we are going to be stripping down. It's going to be super fun, right? Get ready to get really comfortable with everybody around you, okay? Now, as we proceed on, we're going to go to our next station, which is essentially a scrub down. This is where we're actually going to, as we've removed our gear, our outerwear, our boots, our clothing, all of that stuff. Now, and there may be several stations of these scrub downs. Because what it is depending on how many layers that you have on to protect yourself from that environment, we're going to scrub down in between those layers. And so it may be once or twice. So you might actually have a first scrub down area and a second scrub down area where we're going to remove that outer contamination. We're going to have more bins to then drop that kind of in between contaminated material in. And then we're going to proceed to our last area, which would be a wash station as well, a wash station. And this is where we're going to actually wash our hands and scrub those up, and also wash our bodies as well, where this might be an actual shower station where we have disinfectant soap in particularly. So you're not using something like Head and Shoulders on yourself. You want to get an antimicrobial and a very strong medical grade shampoo and soap at this point to scrub your body down with. And then from there, we can actually proceed back into a clean area. And then if we needed to go outside this again, you can think of it as an opposite process. You don't need to shuffle pit or anything like this, but we are going to wash our hands, and we would actually then proceed back out into the dirty side with stations that would help us prepare ourselves, where we would have our gear. Maybe we're going to wear our gas mask or SCBA, where we would actually put on new gloves. We would tape around our gloves and ankles and any seals that we have that would need to get sealed up around ourselves, maybe around our gas mask where a hood would be, in order to prevent any contamination from coming into that suit. Okay. So again, this is just a brief overview of what a hotline is, and you can certainly make changes based on your mission needs, what type of chemical environment or radiological environment you're going in. And now for our sake of argument, we were looking at just a radiological environment, really protecting ourselves against alpha contamination. Okay, because remember, gamma and beta are going to be isolated more or less to the location outward of the actual accident or incident. But the alpha contamination, wind is going to pick that up. It's going to collect on clothing. It's going to collect on gear. And we're going to be taking that back with us. And we don't want to bring that into a clean environment. So that's what the purpose of that hotline is going to do. It's going to decontaminate us, walk us through some steps where we're essentially cleaning from the feet up, taking gear off, and then scrubbing ourselves down. So I hope this was informal for you, give you some ideas for setting up your own hotlines if you ever found yourself in an emergency situation where you would need to decontaminate and protect yourself and your family. So thanks for sticking around tonight, and we will have more on this series as time goes on. And the next things we're probably going to be looking at is a little deeper dive into radiation and protecting ourselves from that, and then possibly looking at RDDs and bad guy use of those, and what we need to look out for in regards to an actual radiological dispersal device attack. So have a good night and God bless.